Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Awaken Your Truth Conversations. My name is Denise Simone with denisesimone.com. And today I am speaking with the beautiful Natanya Lara. Natanya is an energy healer. She does this by supporting women to move out of the overwhelm of their minds and into a deeper, more aligned expression of themselves. I love that. So after a lifetime of avoiding her own true nature, she came face to face with it when her marriage fell apart. She took this opportunity to move back into alignment. When she began spontaneously channeling song mantras, she embraced the calling she had avoided for decades. Since that time, she has trained in several healing modalities, only to find that she has actually been intuitively doing them for her entire life. And it's amazing how life just brings you full circle, right?
Totally. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
And thank goodness.
Thank goodness. So I want to start with very early on when you mentioned here that in your, I didn't say this in the intro, but you mentioned that you were in a deep depression in your 20s. I can totally relate because I was too. And the way I see depression is there's so much purpose in it, and it can be such a true wake up call for us and a true gift for us. You know, in society today where depression is looked at as a problem and as something to fix, but I see it more as opportunity.
Hmm.
Opportunity to come back into, like you said, alignment with who we really are. So, but there's always a um, there's a reason for it, and that's usually because we're carrying beliefs about ourselves that are taking us further and further away from who we really are. So that's where I want to go first. I want to ask you, what were those beliefs that you were carrying? Where were they birthed from?
Yeah, I mean, this is really it, right? And it's taken me so many years, I mean, really, to understand what the purpose of that depression was
Mm-hmm.
and where it came from. And the truth for me is that it started, I think it was really birthed from when I was like maybe 7 or 8 years old. And for so many of us, I think these are the years where we decide who we can and cannot be.
Yep.
And that for me was it. And so I was very, very different from my family. And I love my parents dearly. And they're, loving, giving, wonderful people. And very, very different than me. And so it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to be myself, it's just that there was no model.
Mm.
So the way that I was expressing, um, it felt wrong. I mean, in the in the external world, right?
Mm-hmm.
I use that word in quotes, wrong. So I wasn't encouraged to be myself. I wasn't encouraged to explore what that means, and I think that's pretty common.
Yes.
Um, and so that's where it came from, right? So there's that time in puberty and when we are exploring and discovering who we are. And when in those early years you haven't been given the ground, you haven't decided that for yourself, then it's hard to move out into the external world, which is what we do when we're in our teenage years, and be that person.
Yes.
So we move out there and we're like, oh, who am I? Who am I in relation to this person? Who am I in relation to this person? And we maybe are many different people in many different times and places because we don't have that core knowledge and understanding of who we are.
That's self-connection.
Exactly. And
Yes.
so through all of those years, we're like trying to figure out who we are. And then in this culture, we go, or at least I went away to college. And so then I didn't know who I was, and I didn't have that safe space of my family to be in. And it was like a total free fall.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, and now what? and now who do I be when I can't go home and be who I was because that's not there for me anymore. So there was no safe space. There was no space where I could be with myself and know myself, or have other people around me reflecting to me who I thought I was. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We
Yeah.
go out in the world
Yeah.
and essentially we're confused. And
Yeah.
we're looking for ourselves in the external, in relationships, in jobs, in just anything that we could feel comfort in. So when you mention here that you had many transformational experiences
Mm-hmm.
when you were on your own. Can you talk about those a little bit? Those experiences?
Yeah. So, when I was in college, I'd say I was in a depression for probably about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my reflection now about the reason for that was really what it was like to come out of it. So after being in a depression for 10 years, and I then finally was working with somebody who I did get onto medication.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I had access to different experiences of myself because I was able to separate from that depression. And so it was like a little bit of light got in.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do you think the medication helped you to do that?
I do. I do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it has its place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that there are times when it can be really helpful to break the cycle. Because after 10 years,
Yes.
it's a habitual experience.
Yes. Yes.
Um, So what happened was I had sort of a catalyzing moment where my relationship that I was in fell apart. I was laid off from my job. I was living in New York City, and I knew that I couldn't be there anymore. It was like a sensory overload, and I briefly moved back upstate to where my parents live. And again, I was in this place of free fall in a different way. It was like I was at the end. I was in my late 20s, and I wasn't sure where I was going. I was re-examining what was going on, and this is, a common time. It's like the Saturn return. We call it the Saturn return. So it's when Saturn is back in the sky where it was when you were born, and it's a common time to sort of re-examine priorities. And it coincided with this moment of opening for me when the medication was working, when I was out of um, everything that I had built.
Mm.
And I decided to take that moment and travel on my own to New Zealand. And so that was something that I just needed to do. I needed to have the opportunity to discover who I was. And so when I was traveling, this was really a huge time of opening for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I, like I said, I went by myself. So I had the opportunity to try different things out and to discover in a more considered way than like when I was in my teenage years, who I was in relationship to other people and where I was comfortable and where I was not.
Right.
So I went to a women's gathering, which was like amazing. And it was like falling into the arms of these loving, incredibly heart centered, grounded women. And it was like 2 days, and I wanted it to last forever. And
Mm.
so for me, that experience was transformational, not in that it transformed my life from that moment, but it gave me a nugget.
A
It gave me an
sense.
experience
Yes.
of who I really was and
Mm-hmm.
who I wanted to be.
Love
So when I
that.
say transformational experiences, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Yes. You were put in an environment where you felt fully accepted.
Yes, fully
Mm-hmm.
accepted and
Seen.
safe to express,
Mm-hmm.
safe to discover. Oh, I would love to go with this group of women to the hot springs right now. That feels good to me.
Right.
Or, you know, I would, even just eating meals, like I don't feel like I want to eat chicken right now. I think I just want to have vegetables. Very simple things where I was able to really connect with what was true for me.
Very simple, but yet tremendously huge.
Tremendously huge.
Yes.
And so a little later on in that trip, I had this experience where I was I had gotten a car and I was driving myself around, and I decided to forego the maps and just drive and see where my body told me to go. And so it was the first experience I really had of an awareness of my intuitive sense.
Mm.
And so I spent a day just driving around by what my body told me to do. And I ended up in this like little town, and I got out of the car and I started walking around, and I discovered this yard where it was like there was this picket fence, and inside the fence there were these incredibly beautiful sculptures that had been built of old car parts and different recycled materials. And I remember thinking in that moment, I would never have found this if I hadn't followed my inner guidance.
Mm.
And for some reason, that was really meaningful to me. That moment was a moment that I always go back to as being the one where I thought to myself, actually, this is my gift.
Mm.
This is me. This is the most important part of me. That was another one of those transformational experiences.
So powerful. It sounds like you were meeting, this time alone was allowing you to meet your intuitive self.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like you were leaving your mind and stepping into your heart for the first time.
Exactly.
Love it. So let's move into the next phase.
Right. It didn't last, right? So that's the thing. The thing is that it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I know this is true. I know this is real.
This is what I love, because it feels so good and so true and so right. And yet it's something about just not trusting it enough.
Yeah.
Not trusting it enough. But it's all okay.
Of course.
Because the contrast is what helps us trust more.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, and now I look back. Well, maybe I should save that. Anyway, so moving forward, what happened was I moved back toward the known.
Okay.
Right? So a friend of mine who I knew came to visit me in New Zealand. He was teaching, he was a professor, and he was on sabbatical, and he wanted to come and visit. And, I won't label things mistakes, but like it took me out of that place. And it moved me back into the known of my life. And I came back to the States, and I did build my life in an intentional way from the place where I was, right? So I took a weaving internship and I started weaving, and that was what I did for a long time. So I built things into my life that I really wanted. I still needed to learn more about what did and did not work for me. And so,
of course,
I had some relationships that were not supportive of my truest being. And, the most momentous of that being my marriage.
Which is what I want to lead into.
Yeah.
So you met your husband.
Yep.
And I always like to ask this, when you were moving into marriage with him, was there signs and signals for you?
So many. So many. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So many. It's like sign after sign after sign after sign. I mean, to the point of somebody actually saying to me, a therapist who I went to help me, right? So we had moved back to New York because I had been away from my family for so long, and I wanted to be near them. And what I noticed when we moved back was the incredibly huge cultural divide between him and my family. And I was really grappling with it because apparently I was in love with him. People tell me I was. I don't remember. you know, don't remember. But I must have been. Sorry about the noises. My cat's like throwing things around. So I was grappling with this, and we had just moved back to New York, so I had I had no sort of network of support for myself other than my family, and this had to do with them. I wanted something different, so I got a referral to a therapist, and I went to see her. She came into the room. I told her what was going on, and she said to me, you should break up. You shouldn't marry him. That'll be $300. Basically, that was my experience of it, right? It was an hour, but she basically said, this is not right. And here was the thing. I knew she was right, but I was completely broke. Like, I didn't know where I was going. Like, I was making a career move. I didn't know where the money was coming from. And literally, like, I had no idea this was going to cost me $300. So, like, that experience, it's so interesting, right? So then we move into there's all of that charge around money. That experience completely changed the way that I was able to hear her. So my money fear was so big that I was not able to actually receive the message that she had for me, which I knew was true.
Yep. So
right?
Interesting.
And then...
So it was no respect for her advice because it was, to you, all about money.
To me, I was in shock.
That she was asking.
I'd never paid $300. She was in like Scarsdale, New York or something. It was like, I had never paid $300 for a therapy session before. And I didn't have insurance. I had just moved to New York. And so it was like this whole story built out around the value. And
it's so interesting. I want to point out, some people would flip that and say,
yes, right.
And say, well, it must be right because the value's so high. It's all perspective. It's all
exactly. And now I can look at it and go like, wow, that was amazing advice for $300. Like, man, that was a bargain.
So good. So good.
Oh, wow.
So good.
Yeah. And so, at the wedding, I had a moment, and I won't go into the whole story, but there was a moment where I said to myself, oh my God, I can't call this off. Like, my whole family flew out here. We had the wedding in New Mexico. Everybody flew out here. We're getting married tomorrow. I can't call it off. Mm-hmm. And that was like that last sort of opportunity, that last little red flag in my mind that I just let go.
So many people have that last thought. So many people. So now you're married.
So I was married.
For 10 years.
For 10 years. And it was hard in a lot of ways. And during that time, I grew farther and farther and farther away from myself even more. And we had 2 children, 2 boys. They're now 7 and 9. And, there are a lot of course, so many stories and things I could point to. But the crux of it is that once I had children, something in me shifted. Like, my priorities they became so much more clear. And so even though I didn't have this sort of core sense as I do now of who I am and what my purpose is, I was much closer. And the process for me of having children was hugely, probably the biggest transformational experience that I've had, because it did so clearly distill my values. There was no, like, there wasn't time, there wasn't energy, there wasn't, I didn't have the opportunity to pretend anymore. Every single moment required
your truth.
Yeah, I mean, it required my attention and
your presence.
There's no fluff. There's no room for fluff.
Yes.
Yes, my presence. Mm-hmm. My presence. And so,
but not everybody.
Everybody has that experience.
You must give yourself a lot of credit for that, because children can do the opposite and be a distraction.
Yes, and in many ways they were, and in many ways my this part of my journey has been the learning around that, the learning around who am I even yet with them, who am I despite being a mother, right? And of course, who am I as a mother? Yeah. And so when my husband came to me when I was pregnant with my first son, and he said, I really hate Vermont. I want to move back to New Mexico. I was able to say to him with every single cell of my being, no. And that was the beginning of the end. And it took many years, but it was my reclaiming of my power, because I knew that if I went back there, it would, and not that it would never happen, but I just knew it was not the right choice for me. And he was very angry and very upset. And the truth is that I was very upset too, because I couldn't give that to him. I wasn't able to. I had to choose my own power. I had to. And it was one of the hardest things that I've done, was saying no over and over and over for so many years, because he kept asking. And I had to keep saying no, because it was too important that I become myself.
Wow.
Yeah. So as I took that stand for myself, right? As I took that stand for myself, that was when I began to feel the stirrings, of those things I had discovered back in New Zealand. And that was when I began to look around me and within me and say, I am a seeker. There is more for me. There has to be more, or I can't live this. I can't live this. There has to be more. And when I brought it to my husband, he said, well, good luck finding someone who wants to talk about that stuff. We're not in college anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's just not, that's not his experience.
And doesn't that bring maybe from my experience, when I've been spoken to in that manner, brings back a lot of how we were seen as children. Right?
Yeah.
And actually, he's just playing a role for us to really step into our power. And say that it's time for that clear boundary of, this is who you are, this is who I am, and it's perfect. It's perfectly okay for both of us to be who we are, and for us to move in different directions without feeling that sense of guilt. Right? Without feeling that sense of obligation anymore. That's the healing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you walked away from the marriage.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. It was clear that it was not, we just weren't growing together. It wasn't happening. And the way that, this is a big piece of my growth too, and of my transformation, was in the way that I chose intentionally to shift out of the marriage. And that is because we are both, we both agree it's really important for the kids to be okay. We don't always agree on everything, but we put them, that is our relationship now, is co-parents. And so, in addition, I have during this time been growing my own. So when that happened, right? So when that happened, that freedom, at the same time, again, incidentally, I was laid off of my job. Mm-hmm. So it's like repeat, right? Mm-hmm. So my relationship is over. I was laid off of my job. And I had the opportunity, which I took this time, to really intentionally become. And so in that becoming, I put, especially in those first years, I put a lot of intention into every word I spoke to him, into the way that I brought myself into each interaction. And a lot of the meditating that I did and a lot of the practices that I built were around compassion. Mm-hmm. Not just for myself, but for him, for the relationship. And so, I was growing out of the relationship as I was growing into myself, and they informed each other.
Mm.
They informed each other.
So good. So good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
So I've spent the past 5 years building those practices for myself, and
I want to ask you about the idea of courage.
Yeah.
What you have just explained is so powerful. It just really takes a lot of, I'm trying to think of another word besides courage, but it does take a lot of courage. Like, we can talk about this and explain it, but when we're actually going through it, it takes such a deep knowing that it's like you're walking through a dark tunnel. You don't know where you're going to be when you're out of it, but it just requires a knowing that this is what you must do, and that requires courage. How do you tap in? First, would you agree with that?
I would, but only on reflection. Certainly at the time it did not feel like courage. At the time it was just only what had to be done.
Had to be done, yes.
And the truth is that it's been with the reflection of others that have helped me to see it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I think I never had a sense, and only now am I beginning to, that there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. Mm. Like I wasn't moving toward anything. And I wasn't necessarily moving away from anything, although I guess there was a little bit of that happening. It was mostly just, I am so uncomfortable and I am so unhappy that something must shift. Mm-hmm. Don't know what it's going to be. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I am going to try everything that I can get my hands on to make it happen. That's what was going on for me.
Right. And ultimately, and I can relate because I've been in experiences not where I was married, but where I was in very uncomfortable situations where I had to move out of. And I can agree, we're not really moving towards anything, but we are following a feeling.
Yes.
We're following a feeling that is not something you can see. It's not something you can touch, or it's just pure faith. This is where I need to go. And I think that in the end, the light is something. It is something that we are looking for.
That's true. Yeah.
It's an inner fulfillment. It's nothing we could ever put our hands on. But
no, that's true. It is that. And it is that I have known my entire life since I was that 7 or 8-year-old girl that I wanted for myself. I was just having this conversation this morning, actually, because I remember when being asked what I wanted to be, or, what would make me happy, even as a child, I had this sense that I just wanted to feel contentment. Yeah. And for me, that's that fulfillment you're talking about. That sense that I am, it feels like the words, it's so hard to choose the words because they always sound so overused, but it's that I am living my purpose, that I am, that I am fulfilling some, I don't want to say need, but that I am expressing myself as I was meant to. And in doing so, that I am, making a positive impact in some way. And that, for me, that just fills me up. And I could just sit here all day with that feeling.
Yeah. You're right, there are no words because it's a feeling. It's very hard to put words to that feeling.
It is.
But I understand. So now today, I'm going to bring you full circle to the work you're doing today and how you are helping and guiding other women to step into their power, their personal power, and follow and open up to their intuitive guidance. So tell me a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Sure, yeah. So what I discovered is that I've been doing this work in various ways throughout my life to support myself and other people. And so what the first thing that came to me were what I call song mantras, and they're like little snippets of melodic mantra that we can repeat to ourselves to stay grounded, to remember who we are. And I channel them individually for clients and I'm told time and time again, even as I receive them, and I'm like, really? And then I share it, and whoever I'm sharing it with is like, wow, that was perfect. So, and I can give you just a very small example of how this can be used. This morning, I was getting myself ready. My kids are in the kitchen, and I can feel the energy, right? I'm very energetically sensitive, and I can feel the energy rising, and the voice is rising a little bit, and I'm like, oh no, not again. And I just started chanting my mantra to myself, and I could feel my energy calming, right? And I could feel it just like going out throughout the house, and all of a sudden it was quiet. And like there was no more bickering, and we got out to school on time. I mean, seriously. Hugely powerful. Hugely powerful. So there's the song mantras, and then there's the energy. There's energy clearing and shamanic journey healing, which I do, and I use them. I use them sort of in an alchemical way. I use them together. I also offer them separately. Energy clearing really helps us to release sort of built up layers of energy and other people's energy that can connect, that can sort of get stuck to us, so that our own sort of expression can move freely through us, and whatever is needed in our lives can just flow.
Beautiful.
So that's the energy clearing, and then the shamanic journeying is there are times in our lives when we can sort of fracture off pieces and parts of ourselves, right? We've talked about that. And so the shamanic journey work is gathering up pieces and reintegrating them into the energy body so that we can more fully express powerfully. So those are the aspects of the work that I do right now.
Beautiful. Natanya, thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise.
I'm just so grateful that you could put out your story in such an open way, and that's how we all learn. We learn from each other. We learn through our stories. So I thank you for that. And if you would like to find more about Natanya, you can go to her website, natanyalara.com. Is there any last words that you want to offer before we part ways?
I would just say trust yourself and your journey. You're in exactly the right place.
That's the message, right? All
Yep.
about trust. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful day.
You too.